I'm not one for dramatics. Never have been. I mean, yeah, life throws curveballs, but you deal with them, right? You don't sit around waiting for the world to end or some grand revelation that changes everything. Or at least that's what I thought until last Tuesday morning when my entire universe tilted on its axis. My name's Emily Carter, and I've always prided myself on being level-headed, practical even. Not boring, mind you, just grounded. My husband David used to joke about how I could probably survive a zombie apocalypse because I'd already packed an emergency kit years ago. He said it like it was charming, though sometimes his tone hinted otherwise. Like maybe he found my preparedness stifling. But hey, who wouldn't want someone ready for anything? Anyway, here we are. Or rather, there we were, sitting in our cozy little apartment above the bakery downtown. It smells like cinnamon most days, which is both comforting and nauseating, depending on your mood. And let me tell you, my mood has been all over the place lately. Morning sickness isn't something they prep you for in those glossy pregnancy magazines. It hits hard, fast, and without warning. It started 2 weeks ago. A weird, fluttering feeling in my stomach, followed by sudden cravings for pickles dipped in peanut butter. Gross, I know. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Work had been insane. Between juggling deadlines at the marketing firm where I work and trying to keep up with David's unpredictable schedule as a freelance photographer, I barely had time to breathe. But then came the missed period, and suddenly, denial wasn't an option anymore. So, there I stood in our tiny bathroom, staring down at this plastic stick like it held the answers to the universe. 2 pink lines, pregnant, just like that, my life shifted into uncharted territory. Part of me wanted to scream, cry, laugh, all at once. Another part felt numb, unsure if this was real or just another cruel twist of fate. Either way, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't do this alone. I needed David. David loves surprises, or so he claims. He's got this infectious laugh that lights up any room, and his easygoing charm makes people gravitate toward him. But beneath that carefree exterior lies a man who struggles with commitment. Oh, sure, he proposed to me 3 years ago after months of dancing around the idea, but marriage hasn't exactly cured him of his fear of permanence. Sometimes I wonder if he sees our relationship as more of a partnership than a lifelong bond. Still, I told myself he'd be happy about the baby. How could he not be? We talked about starting a family eventually, didn't we? Sure, eventually might have meant 5 years from now instead of today, but babies have a way of rewriting timelines. When David finally walked through the door later that evening, lugging his camera bag and looking exhausted, my heart raced. This was it, the moment everything changed. I tried to play it cool, offering him a glass of water and asking about his day. Small talk felt ridiculous given what I was about to say, but nerves got the better of me. Hey, I began, fidgeting, with the hem of my sweater. There's something I need to tell you. He glanced up, eyebrows raised. What's wrong? Nothing prepares you for moments like these. No amount of planning can soften the blow of watching someone's face fall apart, because that's exactly what happened when I blurted out the words, "I'm pregnant." For a split second, silence hung heavy between us. Then, without missing a beat, David exploded. You ruined everything. His voice cracked under the weight of anger and disbelief. How could you let this happen? Let this happen? As if I'd planned it. Orchestrated it like some evil mastermind hell-bent on ruining his precious freedom. Tears welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not here. Before I could respond, he grabbed his keys off the counter and stormed out the door, leaving behind nothing but emptiness and the faint scent of cinnamon wafting through the air. The door slammed shut behind him, and the sound echoed through the apartment like a gunshot. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen, staring at the empty space where David had been moments before. My ears rang with his words, "You ruined everything." They played on repeat in my head, each loop twisting the knife deeper into my chest. I sank to the floor, knees buckling under the weight of it all. The tears came then, hot and relentless, streaming down my cheeks until they soaked the collar of my sweater. It wasn't supposed to go like this. Babies are supposed to bring joy, right? That's what everyone says. So why did mine feel like a bomb that had detonated our lives? My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, scrolling through contacts for someone, anyone, who could make sense of this mess. Mom was the obvious choice, but calling her felt impossible. She'd always adored David, practically worshipped the ground he walked on since the day we started dating. Telling her about this would break her heart almost as much as it broke mine. Instead, I called Jess. Jessica Thompson has been my best friend since middle school, when she tripped over her own shoelaces during gym class and landed face first into a puddle of mud. I helped her up and somehow we've stuck together ever since. If anyone could handle raw emotion without flinching, it was her. She picked up on the second ring. "Em, you okay?" "No," I choked out, barely able to get the word past the lump in my throat. "Can you come over?" Jess didn't ask questions. She never does when I sound like this. Within 20 minutes, she was pounding on the door, her fiery red hair tied back in a messy bun, and her oversized hoodie looking like she'd rolled straight out of bed, which knowing Jess, she probably had. When I opened the door, she took one look at me and pulled me into a hug so tight it squeezed the air from my lungs. "Oh, honey," she murmured, rubbing circles on my back. "What happened?" So I told her everything, from the positive pregnancy pregnancy test to David's explosive reaction and abrupt exit. By the time I finished, Jess's jaw was clenched so hard, I thought her teeth might crack. That absolute piece of... She cut herself off, exhaling sharply. Sorry, not helpful. It's fine, I mumbled, wiping my nose with the sleeve of my sweater. He's scared. I get that. But still, nope. Jess held up a hand, cutting me off mid-sentence. Don't you dare defend him, Emily. This isn't about fear or timing or whatever excuse he'll try to throw at you later. This is about respect. About standing by the person you promised to love no matter what. Her words hit home, but they also made me feel guilty. Wasn't I doing the same thing, making excuses for him? Trying to rationalize his behavior because I loved him? Love makes people do stupid things, doesn't it? We spent the next hour sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by tissues and half-empty cups of tea. Jess listened as I rambled about everything. The good times with David, the bad ones, and the creeping doubts I'd tried to ignore for years. She didn't interrupt, just nodded occasionally and muttered things like, uh-huh, or that guy needs a reality check. By the time she left, promising to check on me tomorrow, I felt slightly less shattered. Not fixed, not even close, but maybe survivable. The days that followed were a blur. David didn't come back that night or the next. His absence filled the apartment like a ghost, haunting every corner. I avoided the bedroom entirely, sleeping on the couch instead. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart leap, hoping it was him returning, but disappointment became a constant companion. Work became my escape. At least there, I could pretend everything was normal. My boss, Karen, noticed something was off immediately. Karen's sharp instincts aren't limited to marketing strategies. She's got an uncanny ability to read people. One afternoon, she cornered me in the break room while I was pretending to refill my coffee cup for the 5th time. You're distracted, she said bluntly, leaning against the counter. Her sleek blonde bob framed her face perfectly, as usual. And don't give me that I'm fine crap. Spill. I hesitated, clutching the mug like a lifeline. Could I trust her? We weren't close exactly, but Karen had earned my respect over the years. Plus, she'd gone through a divorce herself a decade ago. Maybe she'd understand, so I told her. Well, part of it anyway. I left out the pregnancy detail, focusing instead on David walking out after an argument. Karen listened silently, nodding. Occasionally, when Steve left, she said finally, referring to her ex-husband. I spent months wondering what I did wrong. Turns out it wasn't about me at all. Sometimes people can't handle their own baggage, and they lash out at whoever's closest. Don't let him make you doubt yourself, Em. Her advice lingered long after our conversation ended. It didn't fix anything, but it gave me something to hold on to. A sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't entirely my fault. On Friday evening, 3 days after David stormed out, I decided to take a walk. The crisp autumn air bit at my cheeks as I wandered aimlessly through the neighborhood, leaves crunching beneath my boots. The bakery below our apartment smelled faintly of caramel apples today, mingling with the scent of wood smoke drifting from nearby chimneys. As I turned onto Main Street, I spotted someone familiar leaning against a lamppost outside the coffee shop. David. My stomach twisted violently, half relief, half dread. He looked terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed, his jacket wrinkled like he'd slept in it. When he saw me approaching, he straightened up, shoving his hands into his pockets. Emily, he said, his voice rough. We need to talk. Part of me wanted to turn around and run, but another part, the stubborn, infuriatingly hopeful part, forced me to stay. Okay, I replied softly. Let's talk. And so we did. Standing there under the flickering streetlight, surrounded by the hum of traffic and distant laughter spilling from the bars, we hashed out everything. Or rather, he did most of the talking. Apologies tumbled out of him like water breaking through a dam. How scared he was. How unprepared he felt. How he'd panicked and lashed out because he didn't know what else to do. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice breaking. God, Em, I'm so sorry. I wanted to forgive him, desperately. But forgiveness isn't something you can force, no matter how badly you want it. I believe you, I said finally, meeting his eyes. But believing you doesn't mean forgetting. The night after our conversation under the lamppost, David came home. Not with grand gestures or flowers like some rom-com hero, but quietly, almost sheepishly, carrying a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He looked at me standing in the doorway, arms crossed, and said simply, "Can I stay?" It wasn't exactly romantic, but it was honest. And honesty, raw, unfiltered truth, is something I've always valued more than flashy declarations anyway. Still, letting him back into our apartment felt like opening a wound that hadn't fully healed yet. Every creak of the floorboards as he unpacked reminded me of his absence. Every glance across the room carried the weight of unanswered questions. We tiptoed around each other for days, speaking only when necessary, avoiding anything heavier than small talk. It was exhausting, this dance of pretending everything was fine while both of us knew it wasn't. At work, Karen noticed my distraction again and raised an eyebrow when I tried to brush it off. "You're still carrying that," she said one afternoon, leaning against my desk. Her tone was gentle but firm, the kind that brooked no argument. "Whatever's going on with you and your husband, it's eating you alive. I don't know what to do," I admitted, staring down at the keyboard in front of me. My fingers hovered above the keys without typing. He says he's sorry, and I believe him, but believing someone doesn't erase what they did. Karen sighed, perching herself on the edge of my desk. Apologies are cheap if they aren't backed up by action. You deserve better than empty words, Em. Better than feeling like you have to tiptoe around your own house. Her words struck a nerve, not because they were harsh, but because they rang true. Was I settling? Letting David off the hook too easily because I wanted things to go back to normal? Or worse, because I didn't think I deserved better? That question gnawed at me all weekend. On Sunday morning, I woke early and decided to take another walk. This time, instead of wandering aimlessly, I headed toward the park where David and I used to spend lazy afternoons before life got complicated. The air was crisp, the sky streaked with pale pink and gold as the sun rose higher. Families strolled along the paths, kids chasing each other with laughter bubbling into the cool breeze. I found a bench overlooking the pond and sat down, watching ducks paddle lazily through the water. A young couple walked by, hand in hand, their faces glowing with contentment. For a moment, envy prickled at me, but then I shook it off. Their happiness didn't diminish mine. It just highlighted how far I had to go to find my own. As I sat there, lost in thought, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Jess. "Hey, stranger," she chirped when I answered. "How's Operation Survive your husband?" I chuckled despite myself. Leave it to Jess to make even my most painful struggles sound like a cheesy action movie. Complicated, I replied. He's trying, I guess, but, she prompted. But I don't know if trying is enough anymore. The words spilled out before I could stop them, surprising even me. I mean, yeah, he apologized. He's here now, but every time I look at him, I see that moment. The way he looked at me like I'd ruined his life, and I can't unsee it, Jess. No matter how hard I try. There was a pause on the other end of the line, long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. Then, "So what are you going to do about it?" Her question hit me like a punch to the gut, not because it was cruel, but because it forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding. What was I going to do? Keep waiting for David to fix everything? Hope he'd magically become the man I needed him to be? Or take control of my own life for once? By Monday evening, I'd made up my mind. When David got home from running errands, I asked him to sit down at the kitchen table. His expression shifted instantly, wary but resigned, like he'd been expecting this moment. "We need to figure out what happens next," I began, gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. My voice trembled slightly, but I pushed through. "Because right now we're stuck in limbo. You're here physically, but emotionally, I don't know where you are, and frankly, I don't know where I am either." David nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "Okay," he said. "What do you want?" It was such a simple question, but it carried so much weight. What did I want? More importantly, what did I need? "I need you to step up," I told him, meeting his eyes squarely. "Not just apologize and move on like nothing happened. Show me you're serious about being part of this family. Go to counseling. Talk to someone who can help you process whatever baggage you're carrying. Because if you can't do that, if you can't commit to working through this together, then maybe we shouldn't be doing this at all." For a moment, silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Then, David exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "You're right," he said finally. "I've been selfish, scared, and I hate that I hurt you. If therapy will help, then okay, I'll do it." Relief washed over me, though it was tempered by caution. Words were easy. Actions would prove whether he meant them. Over the next few weeks, David kept his promise. We started couples counseling. Awkward and uncomfortable at first, but gradually opening doors we'd kept locked for years. Meanwhile, I threw myself into preparing for the baby, attending prenatal classes and scouring parenting blogs late at night. Slowly, painfully, we began rebuilding trust. Not just between us, but within ourselves. But just as things started to feel stable, a bombshell dropped. One evening, while sorting through old photos for a scrapbook project, I stumbled across something tucked inside an envelope. A letter addressed to David from someone named Claire. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened it and immediately wished I hadn't. The letter trembled in my hands as I read it, each word slicing through me like shards of glass. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs scrawled in loopy handwriting, but its contents were enough to shatter the fragile foundation David and I had been rebuilding. "David, I miss you. These past months without you have been unbearable. I know you said we needed space, but I can't stop thinking about us, about how much happier we were before everything got complicated. You deserve better than this life you've chosen. Call me when you're ready to talk. Claire." Her name hit me like a punch to the gut. Who was she? A friend? An ex? Someone he'd met during one of his freelance gigs that kept him away for days at a time? My mind raced, piecing together fragments of conversations I'd ignored or dismissed. Late night? Texts he never explained. Weekends spent working in cities hours away. The way his phone always seemed to buzz just out of earshot. I stared at the letter, bile rising in my throat. How could I not have seen it? All those times I brushed off my doubts, telling myself I was being paranoid or insecure. And now here it was, staring back at me in black and white. Betrayal has a way of making you feel stupid, like every red flag you ignored was screaming loud enough for everyone else to hear except you. When David walked in an hour later, whistling some tune under his breath, he froze the moment he saw me sitting at the kitchen table, the letter spread out in front of me like evidence at a crime scene. "Emily," he started, his voice catching when he spotted the envelope. His face went pale, all traces of cheer evaporating instantly. "Where did you find that?" "In your box of old photos," I replied, my voice eerily calm despite the storm raging inside me. "Care to explain?" He sank into the chair across from me, running a hand over his face. For once, he didn't try to deny it. "It's not what you think." "Oh, really?" I snapped, slamming my palm on the table. "Because it looks pretty damn clear to me. Who is she, David? Or should I even bother asking?" "She's someone from my past," he admitted reluctantly, avoiding my gaze. "We dated briefly, before I met you. Things ended badly, and she's been trying to reconnect ever since." "Trying to reconnect?" I echoed, incredulous. "This doesn't sound like reconnecting. It sounds like she still wants you." "And I told her no!" he shot back, finally meeting my eyes. There was desperation in his voice, pleading. "I swear, Emily, nothing happened between us after we got married. She sent that letter months ago before everything fell apart. I was going to throw it away, but I forgot it was there. Part of me wanted to believe him, to take his words at face value and move on. But trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight, especially when it's already cracked beyond repair. Every promise he'd made these past weeks felt tainted, now, like they'd been built on shifting sand rather than solid ground. I don't know if I can do this anymore, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. How am I supposed to raise a child with someone who keeps secrets from me, who makes me question everything? David reached for my hand, but I pulled away, recoiling as though his touch burned. Please, he begged, his voice breaking. Don't give up on us. Not now. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I'll cut her out completely. I'll be transparent. It's too late, I interrupted, shaking my head. You had chances, David. So many chances. But every time you chose fear over honesty. And I can't keep living like this, wondering if the next shoe will drop. For once, he didn't argue. He just sat there, defeated, as the reality of what I was saying sunk in. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Telling David I wanted him to leave felt like ripping out a piece of myself, but staying would have destroyed me completely. Jess came over almost immediately, armed with wine and takeout, ready to help me pick up the pieces. Karen called to check in, offering support without judgment. Even my mom showed up unexpectedly, wrapping me in a hug so tight it made me cry harder. But amidst the heartbreak, something unexpected happened. I found strength. Strength I didn't know I had. This baby growing inside me wasn't just a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. It was also a symbol of hope, of new beginnings, of a future where I didn't need anyone else to validate my worth. By the time December rolled around, I'd moved into a small apartment near Jess. It was cozy, with big windows that let in sunlight and walls painted a soft shade of blue. Perfect for starting fresh. David stopped by occasionally to see the baby once he or she arrived. He promised he'd always be present as a father, but we both knew our marriage was over. Closure came slowly, painfully, but it came. On Christmas Eve, I sat alone in my new living room, sipping hot cocoa and watching snowflakes drift lazily past the window. My stomach fluttered gently, a reminder of the tiny life growing inside me. Despite everything, I smiled. Life moves forward, even when it feels like it shouldn't. And sometimes, moving forward means leaving behind what no longer serves you. As the clock ticked toward midnight, I placed a hand on my belly and whispered, softly, "Just you and me, kiddo. We're gonna be okay." And for the first time in months, I believed it.